Hello and welcome back to another episode of Your Drone Questions Answered. I'm John Duca with the Drone Launch Academy, here to find the answers to your drone questions. So today's question is, which cities and states in the US have the strictest drone laws? And so this is something like if you're traveling for a job or for even just to fly recreationally, what should you know? Should you know that maybe this place has stricter laws than back at home? So with me I have David Young, founder, Drone Launch Academy. David, thanks for being back here with me today.
What's up, John? Good to be back.
So we have kind of talked similar topics, privacy laws, locations, and stuff like that. We're going to take a little deeper dive today, though, on some of these strict cities, states.
So, a little bit of crossover with an episode we did a little while back on can you fly your drone in your neighborhood? Like, what do you need to think about? Because some of those privacy laws come into effect. So, we covered a lot of like state by state privacy laws there. I'll give a recap there. But as far as cities go, there are certain cities where it's more strict, or it's at least more well known that you can't really fly drones there much, if at all. Maybe we start with a quick recap of some of the states that have, I would say, more enhanced privacy laws. States usually don't say like, hey, you can't fly your drone in the state, because they can't do that from like an FAA standpoint. Because if this is your first time listening to the show, or you're newer to drones, the FAA controls the airspace. So once your drone is in the air, the FAA regulates what happens or where you can be with the drone itself. Where it gets a little dicey is that states slash cities or whomever, they can enact regulations about what you can do from a person standpoint on the ground, like, so where you can operate a drone from. So they can say, hey, you can't take off your drone and you can't operate it from standing here in this city park or wherever. Okay. They can say that, which is how a lot of them try to enact these rules. But they can't say you're not allowed to fly your drone over that river, because the FAA controls the airspace, just like they're not allowed to say, hey, that airplane's not allowed to fly over here. So that's something to keep in mind. So you need to make sure, first and foremost, that from an FAA perspective, you are allowed to be flying in the area you're flying in, which typically means there's things like airports and TFRs. So TFRs, temporary flight restrictions. Again, we have another episode about that, but that's going to be, if there's a big sporting event, you're obviously not going to be able to fly your drone over the football stadium or a NASCAR race, or, if the president is landing somewhere, a lot of times there's a TFR there, or Disney World, there's like a permanent, even though it's a TFR, temporary flight restriction, there's basically a permanent TFR up over Disney. So there's places that you just can't be, right? And you can check those. Any real app that you use, Aloft, Autopilot, any of those common ones where you're able to check the airspace, they should have all those loaded in there so you can see it. If you want to be doubly sure, you can just Google NOTAMs, NOTAMS. That's notices to airmen. You can look that up, and the FAA publishes those, and you can, find where you are and check for those. So that's from being your drone in the air perspective. Then there is sort of, if you go to the state, that's federal level. So that's everywhere. Another federal thing is the National Park Service says you can't fly your drones inside of a national park. They can only control that you take off and land from in a national park. So if you're across the street, you can technically take your drone off and fly over the national park. But most national parks are so huge that you wouldn't be able to keep your drone within line of sight to effectively do it. But we have another episode about how to legally request permission to fly in a national park. So if you're interested in that, you go check that one out, which it's possible, but it's just a humongous headache. You got to do a ton of paperwork. Bring it down to a state level. There are certain states that have more enhanced privacy restrictions, and they do this in the name of privacy. So they're like, you're not allowed to photograph people basically where they would have a reasonable expectation of privacy. So like they're on their property, they're inside, things like that. Some of those states are Florida. They have rules that say, privacy slash sensitive areas like critical infrastructure, correctional facilities. You're not allowed to use your drones for surveillance. So I'm going to go film this person on their private property. Same thing with Texas, California. So like they say, hey, you're not allowed to capture images of people's private property. Now in certain states, there are exemptions. So like Texas, it's like, hey, if you've been hired to go get real estate images, like you can go take pictures of that property. And, essentially if you catch someone else's property in the frame, you just can't be like targeting that property. So each state has some weird case by case stuff. Again, go watch the Can I Fly My Drone in My Neighborhood episode if you want us to dive into that specifically. But a few cities, now let's move to cities. A few cities I want to call out two in particular that are very strict are Washington, D.C. and New York City. So New York City announced that they had some new drone laws that they were going to release. And we recorded an episode on that a little while back, but I'll touch on it here again because it's a little bit more, not evolved, but they have some more information out about it, and the process is a little more concrete now. But in Washington, D.C., there's a very wide circle that you're not allowed to operate any aircraft in. So it's different than like a TFR, basically a national security circle. Because in Washington, D.C., you got the White House, Congress, the Pentagon, all of these different things. It's a pretty wide circle around Washington, D.C., where you're not allowed to operate aircraft without a lot of special permission. You can look that up. Again, that should be inside those apps. So I've pulled it up here. For those of you on YouTube, you should be able to see like a photo. So there's two rings. There is the Washington, D.C. SFRA, which is Special Flight Rules Area, which is a 30-mile ring radius around Washington Reagan Airport, which is basically right next to Washington, D.C. And then there's an inner ring, which is the prohibited area that is called the FRZ, Flight Restricted Zone. So there is basically no flying, no drones, no general aviation aircraft are allowed to fly here at any time, because that's where all like the, Pentagon, White House, Congress is. But then there's 30-mile radius outside of that where you're still not allowed to fly without special FAA permission and authorization. So if you're looking, I don't know if you're familiar with the DC area, but I used to live in Manassas, Virginia. I lived close to DC when I worked downtown DC, and then I lived in Manassas, which is like 45 minutes outside of that. And I think I was technically, I was still inside of that ring. Like you don't get out of that ring until you are pretty far away from Washington, D.C. So anyway, I put an image up. It looks like a whole lot of stuff going on here, but it's huge. It goes almost all the way up to Baltimore, and then it goes down as far as like Stafford, Virginia, if you guys are familiar with Virginia. So it's pretty big. So very, very enhanced flight restrictions in sort of the Northern Virginia, DC, Southern Maryland area. So that's things you need to keep in mind. And if you're going to fly drones there, a lot of extra FAA approval. Then let's move to New York City. So with New York City, again, also that's been like that for Washington, D.C. for a long, long time. New York City, they, as of July 2023, so a little over a year ago, they created a permit process. So you can't fly drones in New York City without going through a permit through like basically the NYPD. So I'll put a link to this webpage. It's an NYPD webpage where you can sign in, you can create an account, and you can apply for a permit. Even if you get a permit from the NYPD, you might also have to get an additional permit from the Department of Parks and Recreation or the Office of Media and Entertainment, unless you're going to fly at a model aircraft field. So they have a link on their website that show the Washington, D.C. model aircraft fields. You can type in your zip code or your borough or write in your borough, and it shows you, hey, here are some designated model aircraft fields where you can fly your drones or, unmanned aircraft, hobby drones, wherever you'd like. In addition to doing those things, the applicant also has to notify, you have to post a notice within 100 feet of any takeoff or landing site. It's a notify people. And then you have to notify each community board or community district where the unmanned aircraft is anticipated to capture or transmit still images, video, or audio. So whole lot of stuff to go through. And I think the permitting fee, the application fee is like $150. Those are the two cities I know where there's a lot of extra restrictions: New York City, Washington, D.C. And another time I was in Seattle a few years back, and I got stopped from flying my drone there because I didn't have a permit, which I didn't know I needed a permit. But apparently in a lot of places you need a permit in Seattle, but specifically in public parks. And you'll see this in a lot of cities. They've banned drone flying within public parks unless you have a special use permit. The next one would be LA. So again, drones are prohibited in LA city parks unless you have a special use permit. Also, around flying drones around the Hollywood sign or in Griffith Park is prohibited. It's a no-fly zones. Obviously, there's like LAX and things like that around airports. We've already covered that. So there's a lot of, in most major cities, you won't be able to fly your drone in public parks without a permit from them.
Okay.
Now, I want to reference a helpful website that I found. It's worldpopulationreview.com. They do a lot of like state by state information. But we'll link this up, and they have a drone laws by state. So there's a lot of different places around the internet that catalog drone laws. There's like a findlaw.com and a couple other ones. They sort of aggregated all the information from those and put it in a nice little database that you can download and filter, which is pretty cool. It has categories of, is drone surveillance of people and buildings prohibited? Is there drone use restricted for state parks? Is drone use for hunting allowed? A lot of times people want to scout out things with drones for hunting. Are there extra local drone laws? Is there rules against or like penalties for drones interfering with first responders? So things like that. It's a pretty nice little database here. They grab their information from around the internet. So hopefully it's up to date. But I thought this would be helpful for someone if you're looking like, wonder about my specific state. They can look state by state because it's too much for us to cover 50 states on like a 10-minute podcast. But
Yes.
something else that I thought would be helpful for people. But those are the ones that are kind of top of mind that I've had experience with, or at least have heard more about as I've done research. Definitely DC and New York are the biggest ones. Most major cities have stuff against flying in parks, and then state by state privacy laws. You can refer to that other episode, but the big ones that I saw were Texas, Florida, California, and I'm sure there are others that have some privacy restrictions as well. So that's sort of in a nutshell what I got.
No, I really appreciate that. And these are major population centers. So it really affects a lot of people, whether you live there or you're going to travel there. So really appreciate you sharing this information.
Yeah, especially in DC, it kind of stinks because you feel like you're super far away from DC. Like 30 miles is pretty far. Like you wouldn't even know you were close to DC, where I used to live the last year I lived there, like out in kind of Manassas area. And you're like, oh no, you can't fly here. Technically, you're not supposed to fly your drone here. Now I think it won't even let you take off in the 15-mile radius one.
Oh, yeah.
And then the 30-mile radius one, from the research I've done, it says you're not allowed to operate your drone there. But I remember getting FAA permission to fly there when I did live there. So maybe it's a little more relaxed out there. Maybe they've changed it since I lived there. So I don't want to get any nasty emails saying, oh, you're wrong about the 15 to 30-mile radius. I could be wrong about that, but I know for sure the 15-mile radius around DC is true.
Well, David, thank you. I really appreciate you coming on, sharing this information. Hey, if you got a drone question, please, we'd love to answer it. You can type your question into ydqa.io. We'll see it. We'll find someone who can answer it. Or if you're part of the Drone Launch Connect community, type it in there. It's a great community to be a part of. People are asking questions all the time and answering them faster than we can here on this podcast. So please, great community to be a part of. But until then, we'll see you in the sky.